the work that the council has already done to make government work better. And I think it really bears a significant amount of attention that we have agreed to dismantle a major county department, the Department of Economic Development, and we are moving as rapidly as feasible to reconstitute both our economic development and workforce development efforts in a way that is more dynamic, more in touch with the needs of the private sector, more flexible. And so we are going to, this week, take up expedited Bill 4015, the Workforce Development Amendments, which will authorize us to designate a new nonprofit corporation as the county's workforce development organization. And then we are also moving ahead with the Montgomery County Economic Development Corporation. We expect to receive from the county executive this week his nominations for the board of that organization, and we want to appoint that board promptly, and then that board can move ahead and identify a CEO, set itself up in a new office, hire staff, and consummate the operational handoff from the department to the new corporation, the Montgomery County Economic Development Corporation. So it continues to be the case that we cannot meet the needs of our population for services without a growing tax base, and these efforts, both in workforce development and in economic development, are the strategy that we hope to employ to grow our tax base and to be not as dependent as we are on federal employment, identify growth sectors in industry and work with those growth sectors to position ourselves better for the future. And I think we've done a really tremendous job. I think this was a big task to take on. Clearly there was pushback, there was resistance. We had public employee union concerned about what was going to happen to its members. We still need to monitor the placement of those members who have seniority rights within county government, but my impression is that that's going reasonably well, and I've been in touch with the Chief Administrative Officer, Tim Firestein, a number of times to make sure that, and I believe he is paying real attention to placing those employees, but in the big picture, what we need is a private sector focused approach, and that's what we're going to be taking. Consistent with that, I'm delighted that the council's advocacy finally resulted in a working health and employee wellness program, which not only conveys to our employees that we care about them and how they're feeling and how productive they are, but in the long run will provide savings to taxpayers because our own taxpayer-paid health insurance programs presumably will be less utilized when employees are healthier and fitter. So I'm wearing my Virgin Pulse device here today. Patty, you'll be glad to know I do have it today. And we want to convey this message that your employer, Montgomery County, cares about how you're feeling, how you're doing, and we want to encourage employees to get up, get going, get fit. And so the Live Well Virgin Pulse program, which is well underway now, we're going to evaluate that on October 15th in a joint meeting of the Government Operations and Health and Human Services Committees. It was 2011 when I convened the task force on employee wellness, and now it's 2015 and we finally have a program up and running, and we want it to succeed because we think that the benefits are going to be substantial. And then the final point I would make in terms of the council's oversight to make sure that we have a government that works is the good work that we've done in the ad hoc committee on liquor control. I don't believe that the Department of Liquor Control would have as aggressive an action plan or an expansion plan had the council not empowered this committee to really push and to say that the status quo is unacceptable, the level of customer service is unacceptable, and we've adopted a partway strategy to privatize special orders, but in addition, we're going to open new stores, we're going to provide better customer service, and I think this is largely, if not entirely, attributable to the county council making sure that these improvements get made. Chairman Reamer and Mr. Elrich and I have done quite a bit of work in the ad hoc committee. Other council members have participated actively, Mr. Katz and Mr. Berliner, but the bottom line is that the council is exercising its oversight and using the tools available to it to provide a government that works. So I'll take any questions that you have.
Question about the transfer of money for the Chevy Chase Middle School. There's still a lot of community opposition. What would you say to people who say this park is not the place for this school? We don't want this expansion.
Over the weekend, I had the opportunity to attend the launch of a child care center in the Park Recreation Building in North Chevy Chase Park. I think that any location in the densely built up down county would encounter pushback. We don't have a lot of available land, but we do have a growing population, and so any location is going to involve some give and take, and there's going to be pros and cons. The reason I mentioned North Chevy Chase Park is that was identified as one alternative, which was evaluated by the school system, and now the neighbors around the Kensington site are saying, well, why don't you just put it in North Chevy Chase? And yet that park is being utilized, and a new daycare center is opening there right now. If we were to pull back from the site that's been identified for BCC Middle School number 2 and say, no, this North Chevy Chase location, as yet we haven't heard from anybody objecting to it, I guarantee you we would hear from people objecting to it. So while we want to make sure that the dollars are well spent and that we get the very best possible school at that location, I don't think there's any perfect location, and I don't think that any of the alternatives which have already been evaluated would encounter unanimous support. Any location where you're going to build something new in a densely built up environment is going to encounter resistance. I'm not minimizing the observations of the neighbors, and we don't want an inadequate middle school. We want a great middle school, and so we want to, as in the other examples I gave, we want to exercise our oversight to ensure the best possible outcome.
On liquor control, a lot of people outside the county in particular ask, why is Montgomery County even involved in the liquor business?
So every government is involved in the liquor business to some extent. It's a spectrum. Liquor is a substance that people enjoy utilizing, but it also brings public health hazards and risks, and so there's a range of government involvement. Historically, Montgomery County has been on the heavier end, and we're involved in a very, very serious effort to evaluate what makes the most sense. And so the council has unanimously approved a recommendation that special orders should now be procured from the private sector, and we need the legislature to concur with that, and we're asking the state legislature to concur with that. And we'll give that a few years and see whether that diminishes the many complaints of poor customer service that we've been getting. And if that fixes it, then great. And if not, we can return, or a future council can return, working with the General Assembly and working with the executive branch. So I think that's an ongoing conversation, but I think we've made substantial progress.
What's your reaction to the latest with the Board of Elections now, Mr. Shalek, saying that considering putting the site back in Burtonsville and leaving that one alone, but still changing the one that's Chevy Chase Potomac?
I had not heard that Mr. Shalek had said that. I think that they should withdraw their suggestion to move an early voting site to Brookville. Brookville's a very pleasant community, but it's mostly rural. It's close to Howard County. It does not serve Montgomery County residents, does not maximize convenience and access. So I think the Brookville location, much as I appreciate Brookville's good qualities, is a waste of money. I don't think we should have an early voting site there. And the Praisner location serves more people. It's accessible by public transportation. So absolutely, I think the Praisner site should be retained. And as far as between the Lawton site and the Potomac site, the Lawton site is more densely populated and serves more people. So I don't think those decisions were wisely made, and I think Mr. Shalek ought to reconsider them, and I hope the board will reconsider them.
Tomorrow, Prince George's County Council is going to take up paid sick leave, something you guys already passed. Have they consulted with you at all? Is their bill similar to what you have from what you know? I mean, and on top of that, how important is it, like the minimum wage, where both counties as well as DC sort of move together on this?
I'm on very good terms with all the members of the Prince George's Council, and I was aware that they were moving this, but I'm not familiar with the details of the Prince George's bill. I do think as a region, it's it is better for us, our competitive position, if more local jurisdictions adopt similar rules and laws with respect to treatment of workers. So I support Prince George's County Council moving forward. I think it's a basic worker protection that, as time passes, employers will just come to terms with, and like a 5-day work week, having a weekend. There are just certain protections that you just ought to have in place, and that people will come to expect, and just think it's a routine way of operating.
Another thing that DC's looking at is the paid family leave, 16 weeks, I think it is. What's the law in Montgomery County? Is there something, and would it be something that you guys be looking to follow what DC's looking at doing? Because their plan that they're looking at is quite extensive.
There is no law in Montgomery County requiring paid parental leave. The county has just recently been awarded a grant from the Department of Labor to study how, in effect, a new social insurance program might be created, so that the cost would not necessarily be on the employer. It would be something that you pay into and then draw down when you need it. But it's sort of an academic discussion right now that our Office of Legislative Oversight is going to provide us with a study of how it might work, and that's where we're at right now in that conversation.
Can you explain social insurance? Sort of an interesting term I've never heard before. What does that mean?
I mean that you would pay, as an employee, you would pay premiums, and then when you need it, you could draw down a benefit that would not require your employer to have to pay for it. You'd have an insurance program.
So like a retirement fund for having a kid?
For having paid leave, it would be like that, yeah.
Would it be restricted to parental leave, or because DC's would be for aging parents, or there are a number of circumstances.
Right. So the Office of Legislative Oversight, we just got the grant from the Department of Labor, and I think they will define the parameters of what they're studying. I'm not aware that they've done that yet.
So the OLO would come up with a report on this?
The OLO will have a report on it, and it's being funded by the U.S. Department of Labor.
The time frame on when that might come out?
I don't know. Steve Farber, do you know the time frame on this Department of Labor grant?
No, I believe it will be turned around fairly quickly.
So sometime in 2016 we should see the results.
How much was the grant for?
Do we know how much the grant was for?
I believe it was about $60,000.
We think it's about $60,000. And Councilmember Hans Reamer was very much involved in that. If you want more information on that, you should speak with him.
Out of curiosity, how do they go about putting together this report? What will they be looking at? Just other jurisdictions that have something similar, or?
I am not well versed in it enough to describe the whole thing, but Councilmember Reamer's office has been very much involved, and Chris Sylar, the director of the Office of Legislative Oversight, either Mr. Reamer or Mr. Sylar would be able to describe OLO's plan and what the Department of Labor grant is funding.
Can I ask you about you described the Virgin Pulse. This is something that, is it optional that county workers would sign up for and actually wear?
It is optional, and it is strongly encouraged.
Have you gotten any pushback from people saying, that's a little more information than I would like my local government to have?
No, we haven't gotten any pushback at all. It's been enormously popular. The launch was attended by about 300 people, and the McGeo, the employee union, has been involved in putting it together, and I think it's extremely well received. My impression is that employees appreciate it, that their employer is interested in their welfare and fitness.
How does it, when you're going to be looking at it later this week, will you be looking at just number of people signed up? Is it counting steps and calories burned type thing?
The device does count steps and calories burned, and there's incentives built in that you can actually win up to $300 if you achieve your goals. But the program's just launched, so there will be all kinds of evaluation mechanisms. We want to know if we're moving the needle in terms of claims on health insurance and overall fitness of the workforce. But it's so early, we don't have those data yet. But there will be mechanisms to measure all of that.
It's ignorance. How long is the program act? You said just launched.
It launched in September.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you have months worth of data.
Well, we don't have data that is of value yet, but
Okay.
you need to give it time. Mr. Farber.
Yes, on the Department of Labor grant through OLO, there was a release that went out a few days ago from Mr. Reamer's office, and Neil will circulate it so that everyone can
Very good.
take a look at that. It has the facts and figures.
Very good.
Any other
But
questions?
it's like a paid leave like that, like maybe DC's looking at. I mean, how important is that? You talked about workers' protections. What's sort of the next thing? In Montgomery County raised the minimum wage, you put paid sick leave in. What's sort of your next step in doing these sorts of things for workers? What do you think it is?
I'm not prepared to commit.
What the results of OLO's study will be. It'll provide us with useful information, and then we will assess whether we want to establish something like that. Anything else? All right, thank you all for coming. Always good to see you. Appreciate it.